Okay, good afternoon, commission stakeholders. It is about 5 after 1. And if you're trying to find your way to the 2024 All SB1 Program Guidelines Development Kickoff Workshop, you are in the right place. I'm going to preface today's workshop by saying I know we're nearly 4 years into the pandemic and using virtual platforms. But for the programming team, Zoom is a relatively newer platform. We've historically used GoToWebinar, so we may be troubleshooting this a little bit, which is also going to make us seem relatively late to the party. So we're going to ask everybody to bear with us, but we will go through meeting specifics here shortly. So I will ask Ken Lopez, who is running our PowerPoint, to go to the next slide. And again, welcome to this afternoon's workshop. I'm Matthew Yozgat. I am the Deputy Director for SB1 Programming here at the Commission. I've been with the Commission for several years now, and in that capacity, I've been managing several of the Commission's different SB1 programs. And I'm very fortunate to be joined by several other team members, as well as our esteemed Executive Director, Tanisha Taylor, who I will introduce momentarily. But before we get into that, I will ask Ken to get to meeting logistics on the next slide. So we want to welcome all comments and questions as a part of each item on this workshop. As you can tell by now, this is an entirely virtual workshop. We're considering hosting hybrid workshops for the SB1 programs this upcoming spring, but just know that we will always have at least a virtual option. For that reason, we want this to be conversational, so we encourage that everyone uses the raise hand feature as early into any item that we're talking about to give the system time to acknowledge you, and you will be called upon and asked to unmute and then be able to present your comment. Or alternatively, you can use the Q&A tab to submit a question or comment in writing. If you do this, we please ask that you specify the item or topic that you're specifically asking about, and then Alicia Sequeira, actually, who's on our team and will be handling the Q&A function, will go ahead and read either the question or the comment on your behalf. We ask that all verbal or written speakers clearly state your name and organization at the start of your comment so that we can enter that into our record. And we also ask that every registered attendee use their unique link that was provided. I didn't see any duplicates when I was reviewing the attendee list, but we ask that in future workshops you don't share links with other participants. You just make sure that you register yourself using the link that we provide either in the save the date or in the agenda. So with that, I'm going to move on to our next slide, which I'm very privileged to introduce Tanisha Taylor as our Executive Director. So Tanisha, I'm going to turn it to you for opening remarks.
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks everyone for joining us today for our fourth SB1 Programs Kickoff Workshop and for continuing to help us build upon the success of our first 3 cycles. It's really exciting to be kicking it off today, and I'm really excited to be here with the team and all of you. We look forward to working with you to develop updates to our guidelines that continue to achieve the statutory goals of each program and contribute to developing a safe, equitable, clean, and efficient transportation system that improves the quality of life for all Californians. The Commission's competitive SB1 programs represent a small but important portion of transportation funding in California. As we continue to experience the acceleration of climate change, we need to take this opportunity to continue to leverage state transportation funds to help us meet this threat. At the same time, we must continue to maintain the statutory objectives of the programs and recognize that all transportation projects do not serve the same purpose or have the same results. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to transportation investments. Further, we need to create economic, mobility, and accessibility opportunities for all Californians, especially our most vulnerable residents. As you know, throughout our history, improvements to the state's transportation system have disproportionately burdened, disadvantaged, and historically impacted and marginalized groups. Last cycle, the SB1 programs highlighted these issues by requiring community engagement as an evaluated criteria to ensure that the SB1 programs were promoting projects that further equitable outcomes. This is an area where we plan to take farther in our fourth cycle. The Commission is committed to actively working to promote equitable outcomes through our programs, policies, and practices, and intends to use the programming guidelines to help ensure equity and robust public engagement. Transportation infrastructure and funding are just one piece of a much larger puzzle to meet the state's economic vitality, climate, health, and equity goals. But we need to make sure we are doing our part as transportation so that all of the pieces continue working together. I ask that you all actively participate in each of the program workshops our team has planned over the coming months. The guidelines development process is an integral part of the Commission's policymaking, and your contributions are invaluable to the finished product. Thanks for your participation today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And with that, I'll turn it back to Matthew.
Thank you very much, Tanisha. I think that's a perfect segue actually into our next slide. So Ken, if you don't mind moving on. I'm going to talk a little bit about our workshop overview, not just for today, but for some of our future workshops that we plan to hold. So before I ask you to move on to the next slide, Ken, I'm going to just reiterate that today we are here to talk about the 3 competitive SB1 programs, the Local Partnership Competitive Program, the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, and the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program. We will also be combining the Local Partnership Formulaic Program conversation with the LPP Competitive Program. This will be the first of maybe 2 or 3 workshops where we bring all the programs together. But after this point, and we'll get into this a little bit later, we do plan to split off program workshops to be individually held so that stakeholders interested in a particular program only need to participate in that particular conversation. Again, as you can tell, this is a virtual workshop, and we held all virtual workshops in cycle 3 to get to this point, and we will continue to hold at least the hybrid option this upcoming spring. So Ken, I'll ask you to move on to the next slide. And it is our desire to always post agendas for each workshop at least 10 calendar days prior to holding that workshop. Presentations and recordings will be posted after each workshop, and this is also a practice that we held in cycle 3 to ensure that if our stakeholders miss any piece of the conversation, they can enjoy watching the recordings on their own time and hopefully get caught up. Do you understand that staff will make recommendations within the guidelines or for future workshops based on the discussion and feedback we have during these workshops? What that means is we plan to use these workshops as an integral part of our policy making here at the Commission. The way that it goes is that the program managers will lead developing updates to the guidelines, and then through these conversations that we'll have with stakeholders at our workshops, it will inform our draft guidelines, which will eventually become final guidelines for Commissioner approval. And then we do reserve the right to say that not all previously covered topics will be readdressed at subsequent workshops unless Commission staff or stakeholders deem them absolutely necessary or prudent for further discussion. This allows us to keep the context of each workshop not redundant. So with that, let's move on to the next slide, Ken. And now I'm going to introduce the program management team that will be joining me on today's workshop. So first, I would like to introduce Naveen Habib, who is the program manager for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. Naveen has been with the Commission for nearly 2.5 years now, and has been managing the Solutions program through that duration, and she'll be covering some background on the program later this afternoon. Next, I would like to introduce Lashara Ward, who is the program manager for the Local Partnership Program. Lashara has been with the Commission for a little over a year now, and in that time has successfully seen the adoption of our 3rd competitive cycle this past June. And Lashara will be taking on both guidelines developments for our competitive and formulaic program until we have a new program manager for our LPP formula program, hopefully soon this spring. And last but not least, I would also like to introduce Kayla Giese. Kayla is our SB 671 Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment Coordinator, and is currently assuming the role of Interim Trade Corridor Enhancement Program Manager. And this is until, of course, we have a new TSEP program manager brought on board early this spring. But in the meantime, Kayla has been with the commission, for almost 5 years now, I believe. And in that time, she's been working on several different SB1 programs and has been working on TSEP for a little over a year now as well. So I also, before we move on to the next slide, want to introduce some of our help today on this webinar. Without their participation, like I said, we're troubleshooting Zoom here in December 2023. So we have Ken Lopez, who is a research data specialist, who is running the slide deck. We have Alicia Sequeira, who will be helping us with questions and answers. Alicia is our program manager for the Local Streets and Roads program. We have Celeste Almanza, who is our program analyst on the Local Streets and Roads program. And we have Ben Williams, who is our program analyst for the Local Partnership program. So Ken, I'll ask you to move it to the next slide. And I'm going to cover a couple SB1 highlights and overviews before we turn it over to the specific programs. So just to reiterate that SB1 provides the language of SB1, the statute from 2017, provides the statutory foundation for the three programs that we'll be covering today. SB1 does require that the commission develop program policy for each of these programs through this public guidelines development process. So just to reiterate, the guidelines development process is the commission's policymaking practice, and then obviously project selection come at the end of every guidelines development and call for projects. Each program has its own set of guidelines which govern how those programs are developed, implemented, and facilitated, including how funds would be distributed to reimburse agencies for eligible expenditures. We're now in our fourth grant cycle, and commission staff are planning to host public workshops for each program this upcoming fall. And we do plan to have guidelines adopted at the end of this summer. So we're currently aiming for the August 2024 commission meeting, which would also initiate a call for projects. And of course, as previous cycles, adopted guidelines will govern project selection and program implementation for this upcoming fourth cycle, which we are calling the 2024 program cycle. And if you don't mind moving on to the next slide. So really briefly, I just wanted to cover some highlights that we captured for all three programs last cycle that the commission is very proud of. So cycle 3 saw us with our first major consideration of how to make projects more equitable, or how to lift up projects that promote more equitable outcomes. And it was the development of our SB1 competitive program transportation equity supplement. Later on, you'll hear that we plan on picking this document up again and evolving it for our fourth cycle. We were also very successful and happy to release what we refer to as the SB1 Performance Measure Guidebook, which is officially referred to as the Technical Performance Measurement Methodology Guidebook, which is a kind of how-to on how to quantify or calculate various performance metrics that we require in the SB1 programs. And it's kind of a list of best practices or accessible resources to our stakeholders that are looking to develop performance metrics. We're very proud to say that we made good on our commitment in Commission Resolution G2160, which was approved back in August 2021, to implement all the CAPTI strategies that were assigned to the Commission for Commission programs. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the projects that we ended up recommending in Cycle 3, which were a result of those the implementation of those CAPTI strategies. And last but not least, we're very proud of our successful programming of just over $1.7 billion in our 3 SB1 competitive programs this past June 2023. So we're going to go into our next portion, which we'll talk about the program specifically and some highlights and some cycle overviews for our upcoming 4th cycle. I'm going to turn it over to Naveen to talk a bit about where we've been with our equity supplement and community engagement evaluation criteria. And then we do plan on hosting office hour sessions again, and Kayla will cover some of that. So before I turn it over to Lashara, who I believe will be up first, I just want to remind everybody, if you do have any comments or questions throughout this workshop, please don't hesitate to either drop it in the Q&A or raise your hand. So with that, Lashara, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Good afternoon, everyone. The Local Partnership Program, or LPP, as I will call it in this presentation, is available to local agencies that have approved fees or taxes dedicated solely to transportation improvement projects, or that have imposed fees, like a uniform developer fee, for example, that is dedicated solely to transportation improvements, both of those. The LPP was created with the intention of balancing the need to direct increased revenue to the state's highest transportation need, while fairly distributing the economic impact of increased funding. In other words, the Commission wanted to support and help to fund both large and small transportation infrastructure projects that were also leveraging local funds. Please keep in mind that all transportation infrastructure projects are eligible for this program, as are bus, passenger rail, and light rail replacement. The LPP receives $200 million a year, which is split between the formulaic and the competitive programs. Of those funds, $20 million is set aside as incentive for newly eligible agencies, and the remaining $180 million is split, with 60% being distributed to eligible agencies by formula, and the remaining 40% being awarded through the competitive process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the LPP program is only for local agencies that collect revenue dedicated solely to transportation projects. For the formulaic program, this revenue must be generated from a voter-approved tax, toll, or fee. For the competitive program, the revenue could also be from a voter-approved tax, toll, or fee, but alternatively, it could be generated from an imposed fee, like a uniform developer fee, for example, so long as the revenue generated is dedicated solely to transportation projects. For the eligibility criteria, we have 2 approaches that we use. In the formulaic program, we screen the nomination packages for eligibility and completeness on an ongoing basis as eligible agencies submit programming requests. In the competitive program, however, project nominations are submitted by the deadline and go through an extensive review process. For this past cycle, we focused on 10 different criteria, including accessibility, air quality, and community engagement, among other criteria that are listed here on the slide. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just a quick snapshot of the current cycle. That's cycle 3 for the competitive and cycle 4 for the formulaic. And this slide has some statistics for both programs. The LPP competitive program awarded 11 projects, which are now in the process of getting their baseline agreements approved and allocating their funds for construction. Just to give you an idea of scale, we received 37 project nominations and were able to fund only 11 of them. So it is quite competitive. The LPP formulaic program released a 2-year fund distribution for the 46 eligible agencies. Of the $233 million distributed, $134 million has been programmed so far. The agencies have until the end of fiscal year 23-24 to program and allocate their fund distributions. Under the construction phase outputs header, you can see the magnitude and variety of project outputs that have been allocated in the last year from both the competitive and formulaic programs. Finally, we wanted to bring to your attention some of the Cycle 3 competitive program guideline highlights. These include, first, the elevation of the community engagement discussion to be an evaluation criterion. Second, the incorporation of pro-housing designation as an option to meet the existing efficient land use evaluation criterion. And third, the inclusion of accessibility as an evaluation criterion. Okay, and unless there's any questions, I'm going to go ahead and transfer over to Naveen, who's going to talk about the Solutions for Congested Corridors program.
Thank you, Lashara. I do think that there are some questions. I'm going to pause while Matthew addresses them.
Yeah, so first I'll ask Celeste. It looks like we have a hand raised. So Celeste, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Matthew. John Zhu, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, no. No worries. At least we know that the functionality works. Thanks, John. Okay, so I know we had a couple questions that were typed in the Q&A. Alicia, I'm going to ask you to read some of those in, and we can just address them verbally here to the group.
Sure. So I will go ahead and provide what was provided in the Q&A for responses and questions for 2, and then I will have 2 open questions that are directed to LPP. So first we have, does CTC also select the SB1 project awards, or is this under CalSTA? I am presuming that you're talking about the projects that are selected, hopefully. So based on that, project applications are submitted by eligible agencies and reviewed and scored by the commission. Staff will then make a recommendation for projects for program adoption to the commissioners. And so that's how that works. It's not within the CalSTA to do that. For the second question, does SB1 also include ATP, which is our Active Transportation Program? Active Transportation Program actually is a multi-funded source program, so it's not just SB1 funded. Also with that, they have a separate cycle and program adoption and guideline updates. And so that is always done as a standalone. We do this sort of as a united and kicked off method for the other competitive programs, since they all have the same cycles.
Yeah, and Alicia, before you go on, I think the SB1 also include ATPs is a good comment. And as Alicia mentioned, yes, we are simultaneously conducting guidelines development for our active transportation, I believe our 7th cycle, and they are well underway with their guidelines development and central workshops and branch workshops. So the conversation today is particularly on what we colloquially refer to as the SB1 programs, which are Solutions for Congested Corridors, Local Partnership, and Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. Alicia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. So the next 2 questions are regarding LPP specifically. And so this comes from Vincenzo Corazza. And his question is, where is the list of eligible agencies under the LPP online? And so Lashara, I'll turn that over to you to respond to.
Sure. So for each program cycle, we release a fund distribution. And so that is posted on our website under the formulaic program of projects. You can find it there. It's also part of the book item when it was approved back in, well, I guess formulaic was January.
Great. Thank you. And then our next comes from Shelley Kwan. For LPP, what does CTC's intent mean? CTC intends this program to balance need to direct increased revenue to states' highest transportation needs while fairly distributing economic impact of increased funding.
So go ahead.
I'll take that one, Lashara, because I think CTC's intent is quite frankly, the primary intent is to reward agencies that have voter approved or imposed fees to generate revenue to support transportation improvements in those jurisdictions. And so CTC's intent in the local partnership program is to not only reward them with an additional state funded source to provide as a match for some of those locally generated revenues, but it's also an incentive to encourage more jurisdictions to seek out voter approved measures or to impose fees within their jurisdictions to generate revenue for transportation improvements. I'll turn it back to you, Alicia.
We do have a question about the SCCP program, but we will wait until that portion, or we can do that right now. So does SCCP fund all phases of a project? And this comes from Marisol Gonzalez.
Thank you, Alicia. And Marisol, excellent question. We're going to kick off an overview of the Solutions for Congested Corridors program right now, and I will cover your question during my presentation. Again, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Naveen Habib. I manage the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, also referred to as SCCP, or the program for short. On this slide, as you can see, I have provided an overview about this competitive program, which was established in 2017's landmark legislation, Senate Bill 1. $250 million are appropriated annually from the state highway account to provide funding to regional transportation planning agencies, RTPAs for short, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans to reduce congestion throughout the state. Projects must be included in a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan and a regional transportation plan to be eligible to compete for funds in this program. The Commission encourages nominating projects that align with the state's climate goals, manage congestion through innovative strategies, including multimodal solutions and advanced transportation equity. I would also like to note that the Solutions for Congested Corridors program only funds the construction phase of a project. So I hope, Marisol, that answers your question. Let me know if you have any follow-ups. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So with this kickoff workshop, we begin to plan the fourth cycle of the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. We have come a long, long way. So looking back in the last 3 cycles, the Commission has programmed 26 projects for over $2 billion in SCCP funds, of which we have allocated $1.3 billion as of fiscal year 2022-2023. On the next slide, as some of you may recall, the Solutions for Congested Corridors program underwent an extensive guidelines development process in its 3rd cycle, which covers fiscal years 2023-24 to 2024-25. The most notable changes included elevating community engagement as an evaluation criterion, as well as expanding upon the accessibility and economic development and job creation and retention criteria to consider equity throughout the project nomination and selection process. We incorporated every climate action plan for transportation infrastructure strategy, also known as CAPTI strategies, that was identified for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. This included integrating pro-housing principles into the existing efficient land use criterion. And finally, we provided applicants the option to include any public health and climate change adaptation and resilience considerations that were part of their project planning process in their applications. For the 2022 program, the Commission received 24 project nominations, totaling over $1.5 billion in funding requests. Requests continue to exceed program capacity by over $1 billion each cycle, which demonstrates that there is a great need for projects that address congestion across the state. In the end, the Commission programmed 10 projects for a total of $532.8 million in the 2022 program. These program projects will provide a diverse array of benefits and best demonstrated a shift away from single occupancy vehicle solutions while reducing congestion and increasing throughput in California's highly traveled and congested corridors. Notably, projects programmed in the 3rd cycle heavily promoted travel alternatives to single occupancy motor vehicles. Over 70% of the recommended funding was for projects that support active transportation, transit, and rail improvements that in turn support interregional and interstate connectivity through an integrated statewide multimodal transportation network. That concludes my program overview and recap. I will pause here for any questions or comments. I don't see any. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kayla Giese. Thank you very much.
Actually, before we go to Kayla, this is Alicia. Sorry, we did have a question that came in after your presentation started, Naveen, and it's for LPP, for Lashara. Does LPP require that projects be construction ready?
So for the formulaic program, no. Agencies can program funds to the earlier phases, the PA&E and the PS&E, PNED, sorry. Anyway, so yeah, you can program funds to those earlier phases. For the competitive program, it does have to be construction ready. You can have still be working on the environmental, but it does have to be finished within 6 months of the award. So I hope that answers the question.
So Naveen, Anne wanted to make sure, was it mentioned that SCCP funding is for construction only as well?
Yes.
All right.
The Solutions for Congested Corridors program only funds the construction phase of a project. We do not fund pre-construction.
Wonderful, thank you. And all right, thank you very much. I think that looks like it's it.
Thanks, Alicia. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kayla Giese. Like Matthew said, I'm the program coordinator for TCEP, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with our section. So the program objective for the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program is to fund public infrastructure projects that have a high volume of freight movement, support the goals of the National Highway Freight Program, the California Freight Mobility Plan, and the guiding principles of the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. And the funding for each TCEP cycle is approximately $400 million per year, and that's a combination of state and federal funds. Next slide, please, Ken. Eligible agencies for the TCEP are cities, counties, metropolitan planning organizations, regional transportation planning agencies, port authorities, public construction authorities, and Caltrans. Eligibility criteria covers projects that must be in a regional transportation plan and, if within the boundaries of an MPO, consistent with an approved sustainable community strategy. And eligible types of projects are projects that enhance the freight system's economic activity or vitality, relieve construction on the freight system, improve safety and resilience of the freight system, improve freight system infrastructure, implement technology or innovation to improve the freight system, or reduce or avoid its negative impacts, or reduce or avoid adverse community and or environmental impacts of the freight system. Next slide, please, Ken. So I'll just go over some Trade Corridor Enhancement Program Cycle 3 highlights here. The Cycle 3 covered fiscal years 23-24 and 24-25. Just over $1 billion was programmed for 26 projects. Types of projects funded in Cycle 3 were border and commercial vehicle enforcement facility improvements, zero-emission freight infrastructure, rail improvements, and highway improvements. There were also several policy changes that we made in Cycle 3 to the TCEP guidelines based on workshop feedback. We incorporated commission and CAPTI priorities by adding zero-emission infrastructure and community engagement as a scoring criteria. We removed the PA and ED phase as an eligible phase for funding, so TCEP covers PS&E, right-of-way, and construction phases. We changed the NEPA completion deadline from being at the time of allocation to 6 months after program adoption, and we added a public health subsection to make it clear that projects promoting public health are encouraged. Before we turn over to questions and comments, I'm actually going to turn it over to Matthew to just quickly give a note about some guideline improvements for TCEP coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. So if you are familiar with the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, you're hopefully aware that Cycle 3 was our first program where we not only included a bit of a call out and an evaluation criteria for zero emission, medium and heavy duty infrastructure projects, but we also recommended funding towards a handful of those projects as well. We wanted to emphasize that in our upcoming TCEP workshop, so not necessarily talking about it today, but as a preview to our TCEP workshops, we are planning to hone the zero emission infrastructure evaluation criteria that we have, as well as how we evaluate and determine which of those projects are the most competitive. So that'll be a conversation we'll have in a future TSEP workshop, but just wanted to point to, we understand that that's an area that we're very pleased that we've included and been able to include in this program. However, we still have a bit of a ways to go so that our stakeholders understand how those projects are competitive or can be paired with other modal improvements that can be made as well. So with that, I do believe we have a few questions in the queue. So Alicia, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Sure. So William Walker asked or commented that he would like to be able to see a list of the projects with the slides to have a better understanding of where the funds went.
Yeah, that is a great question. So I think for the sake of not overwhelming folks on this particular PowerPoint presentation, we haven't listed projects out on the slides. However, we can provide links to and William, I'll send these directly to you. On the commission's website, we have pages set up for each of our SB1 programs. If you go to each of those program pages, you'll see that we have like a breakout for each of our cycles. And within those breakout are what we refer to as our program of projects. Those are the projects that were deemed the most competitive for funding. And those are also the projects that commissioners voted to adopt. So we have a full list of all cycle 1, 2, and 3 SB1 competitive projects on our commission website, but I'll be more than happy to send you a link so that you can review what some of those projects are. I'll turn it back to you, Alicia. It looks like we're getting a few questions in here.
Thank you. So actually we do have a member of our team including the link into the Q&A, and so all of you will be able to see it regarding where to find the projects. Just wanted to let everyone know about that. Yvonne Garcia asked if there have been any projects funded in a rural region in TSEP.
Yes, we have. Yvonne, I know you represent Butte. I don't believe we have funded any TSEP projects in Butte County, but in our most recent round, we funded a project in Nevada County. I would imagine that Nevada County considers themselves to be a rural region. We funded a project up in Shasta County in our past round up near Reading. And we've funded several projects in the Central Valley, as well as I would say the Inland Empire in parts of the state that are a lot less populated. So to maybe quickly or conclusively answer your question, yes, we have funded what we would consider rural projects in the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. In any public agency, so think incorporated cities or counties, are eligible to submit projects for consideration.
Thank you. Next we have Jess Manzi. Is there any guidance on how the CTC defines high volume of freight for the program?
Sure, that is a good question. I would say the easiest way to define it would be percentage of truck trips compared to other travelers through that corridor. So if it is a rural space, it would be relative to the trips in that rural corridor. So it is a percentage of trucks compared to other travelers through that corridor.
And that appears to be all in our Q&A for now.
Thanks, Alicia. And thank you, Kayla.
Sorry. Actually, I lied. One more just came through before we go forward.
Sure.
So Sonia Babian has a question regarding SCCP. Are we anticipating that the key policy improvements adopted in fiscal year 2022 guidelines will carry over to fiscal year 24 guidelines, and whether there will be any changes, updates
I love that everyone is preempting our presentations. So yes, Sona, the changes that were made in the 2022 guidelines for SCCP, and I would presume for LPP and TSEP, will be carried over to the 2024 program as well. And there will be, at least for SCCP, I can say there will be minor clarification changes that have been suggested to us during the debriefs. And project evaluation portions from our evaluators, from our stakeholders, and from project applicants. So just minor clarification changes. I do not foresee making any major changes to SCCP guidelines for 2024. That said, there will be updates to community engagement and equity, and that is a really great way to segue into the next slide. Thank you very much, Ken.
Yeah, so
Matthew? There you go.
yeah, I'll take this one on, and then we'll move to Naveen specifically on our community engagement and equity. But so looking forward to cycle 4, we wanted to provide a bit of a preview to some of the overarching concepts that we plan to take on in our cycle 4 guidelines development. I think the last question we got was a great one. Hopefully everybody on this webinar is also familiar with where you can find our existing guidelines. So each time the commission approves updates to guidelines every cycle, those become the foundation for each of the programs moving forward. So that means all changes that were incorporated and considered in a past cycle are now the policy moving forward. And the only way we would change that is if commissioners have suggestions on how to change existing policy, or our stakeholders bring topics up that they would like to see change as well. So this is a preview of some of the changes that we as staff, or not necessarily changes, maybe just stances that we're carrying forward in cycle 4. So in the past, program period lengths have been a large topic of conversation. I believe don't quote me, but I believe in our first cycle, our local partnership competitive program was a 3-year cycle, and our TSEP and SCCP were both 4-year cycles. The commission has discretion to determine the length of the program cycle. And what that means is, because these programs are continuously appropriated, it determines how much funding commission staff have an opportunity to recommend towards projects each upcoming cycle. But that also means that we go a longer period of time without considering new projects or considering new policy adjustments to our guidelines development. So our third cycle for all 3 competitive programs were each 2-year program periods. The final year of funding that we received approval from our commissioners for was fiscal year 24-25. And we are moving forward with another 2-year program period as our 4th cycle, which will cover funding for fiscal years 25-26 and 26-27. And what that means is we will be working with revenues generated and budgetary authority to program 2 years worth of funding for each program. Naveen is going to highlight the second bullet a bit more in her segment, so I'm not going to cover this too much, but just so that the audience knows, consistently across our 3 competitive programs, we are planning to make additional changes which promote community engagement through implementing agencies of projects, as well as more equitable outcomes in the projects that we select. Our third bullet, which is a greater consideration on workforce development. This is going to be either considering evaluation criteria or greater requirements or considerations made on how implementing agencies or areas where projects are generated from are considering how they are adapting to the existing workforce climate when it comes to transportation affiliated positions. And this is a particular topic of interest for a couple of our commissioners, and it has been brought up several times in our most recent commission meetings. We will continue the inclusion of medium-term CAPTI strategies in the SB1 programs. there were a handful of strategies that we started working towards by including what we referred to as information areas that we captured in our applications, and we're going to continue to consider the best way to not only capture that information, but consider it when projects are evaluated. And last but not least, I do have to bring this up. Every cycle, we have a need to reinforce the statutory and program requirements of our programs. And so this is requirements such as in our Solutions for Congested Corridors program and Trade Corridor Enhancement program, requiring that all projects that we fund are listed in a regional transportation plan, which is and if it is in a boundary of a metropolitan planning organization, that they have a sustainable community strategy, and so on and so forth. So we will talk about those requirements a bit more in our respective program workshops to come later this spring. Before I turn it over to Naveen, I'm gonna see if we have any questions or comments on any of these items. I believe we may have a hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Matthew. Martha Armas Kelly, I'm going to unmute you. You just have to unmute yourself.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to, that was way earlier. I just wanted to let you know that I was here and listening. I do understand the multi-funding, that second question where they were asking about the ATP funds. I do understand how that works. So that was already answered.
Thank you, Martha. Yeah, I think you'll have to, I asked the audience to forgive me. I think those of us on the commission staff become so involved in our own programs and our own areas that sometimes it is important for us to take a step back each time we have a public workshop to ensure that our audience understands which programs we're talking about and how they intersect and interact with other programs. So I appreciate the question about ATP.
Yeah, someone had asked that, but that's really where the concern is. Like I mentioned before, the language and the acronyms and the like, like you do become comfortable, right? You understand your own nature of your own work. But for us that are like just understanding the basic tenets of how things work and who does what, it's really important because again, those that are sometimes listening are not familiar with those funding streams as well as what departments they are a native to.
Sure. Actually, so Martha, there are two comments or two bits of feedback I think I'm going to make before I think we might have another question in the queue, and I'll turn it over to you momentarily, Alicia. So before we continue, only because I've now heard from both of you, I do want to let the audience know that we are very fortunate to be joined by our Vice Chair of the Interagency Equity Advisory Committee, Martha Armas Kelly, as well as the Chair of our Interagency Equity Advisory Committee, William Walker. And I think that really demonstrates the importance of having an Equity Advisory Committee that is paying attention to our guidelines development and contributing to our guidelines development and working with commission staff to strengthen our programs. Martha, did you?
No, I just want to thank you for that acknowledgement. But again, just now moving forward, I'm excited because of the fact that when we are in these spaces, those are just those small little recognitions that make the difference for our community that are listening, that may not have that extra knowledge or have attended other meetings. So the idea of just looking at it, if it's the first time, and how would you relate the information to the public in a manner that is best suited for understanding and also inclusion. So thank you again for bringing that up.
Sure. Well, and actually that touches on the second comment I was going to make. So the commission has an active transportation program, which is a specific program dedicated to funding active transportation improvements. But I would say we also get in the habit of referring to active transportation projects as ATP projects. And so I would want anyone on the audience to know, if they're not familiar, that these programs that we're talking about today do fund active transportation improvements, and we typically see them. We've seen standalone active transportation projects funded in the local partnership and Solutions for Congested Corridors program, or we've seen active transportation projects as a mitigation for freight traffic as a multimodal piece to a trade corridor enhancement program project. So we do fund active transportation projects, and sometimes we co-fund active transportation projects with the active transportation program. But the difference between our programs, or the programs we're talking about today, and the active transportation program is the ATP program can only fund active transportation, and alternate modes are eligible in the other SB1 programs. So thank you again, Martha and Alicia. I'm going to turn it to you if we have any other questions, or Celeste, if we have any other hands raised.
No other hands raised. Thank you.
Thank you. So this next question comes from Dimitri Williams, and I'm going to paraphrase it just a little bit because I think it's broad-based enough to apply to all of the SB1 programs that we're talking about today. So any of the projects that are awarded, are cost increases allowed? Can an agency do that once a project has been programmed due to cost escalation factors or anything else?
So that's a good question, and it's a bit hard to answer. So if a project experiences a cost increase or a cost escalation, unfortunately, in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program or the Local Partnership Competitive Program, we do not have the program capacity to fund cost increases through our program. So the requirement is that each time a project receives state funding through one of the SB1 programs, that they are also capable of covering cost increases if they result from either bids coming back high, or cost escalation that I know can occur during the delivery of a project. Now, in the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, we can award supplemental funding, which would come out of future TSEP funding. However, that supplemental funding would have to be recommended by Caltrans. So that would be projects that are on system, or that have it, or maybe not necessarily on system, but projects that the department has sponsored, but the department has, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds of the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, but Caltrans, or what we refer to as the state and the TSEP guidelines, do have a reserved amount to receive at least 40% of total available TSEP funds towards either Caltrans nominated or Caltrans co-nominated projects. So that is the only way that a cost escalation could be covered in a programmed project. I did read the question, and I think the question was, can projects come back and compete again if they have a cost escalation? And the answer is yes and no. I would say that yes, they can. However, they're not competing with a project that's already received funding, that's already guaranteed in their project nomination that they will deliver a finished product with the original SB1 funding ask. For lack of a better way of saying, is not going to compete very well against other projects that are new projects that will deliver new benefits and new outcomes that weren't already guaranteed. So yes, projects can compete again, but we also have the rule where we cannot allocate funds to contracts that have already been awarded, which gets into kind of a gray area for smaller projects that experience cost increases while under construction. So it's a tough question to answer. I'm not sure that I adequately answered it, but if not, feel free to send me an email, actually, and I'd be more than happy to talk about it. Each of our contact information will be available at the end of this workshop. Celeste or Alicia, do we have any additional questions?
Yeah, we have another one from Denise Sifford. Are there any trends that you can share about evaluation criteria for each of the programs where projects are generally not scoring very well?
That's a tricky question to answer. Let me think about it a little bit, and I might come back and answer that when we open it up to comments or questions at the end of the presentation. It's difficult to answer because I would say no, there are no general trends where we have a single evaluation criteria where all projects are not doing well. I would say that our evaluation criteria are set up in ways that even when you consider a road rehabilitation project in the local partnership program, maybe that type of a project isn't providing increased throughput or certainly could be considered to produce operational improvement. But I can assure you that, like, for instance, we have a road pavement index criterion in the local partnership program. So yeah, let me think about that. I'll come back and answer that question. So I'm going to turn it back to Naveen, actually, who's I believe presenting our next section.
Thanks, Matthew. All right, so to carry off of where Matthew left off, to further the implementation of the Commission's racial equity statement within each of the SB1 competitive programs, Commission staff, in collaboration with our then Equity Advisory Roundtable and our stakeholders, developed the SB1 competitive program Transportation Equity Supplement. And because that is a very, very long name, we also refer to it as the Equity Supplement for short. This supplement provided important information on indicators that could be used to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups, equity benefits, community engagement strategies, and anti-displacement resources, which were all intended to guide applicants to provide more detailed information about the project's benefits and impacts to disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. In addition, community engagement was elevated as an evaluation criterion to provide a mechanism to ensure that the project selection process results in projects that provide more equitable outcomes due to disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. Next slide, Ken, please. Thank you. On this page, I know it's a little bit hard to read, but it's because they're image captures and snapshots. These are excerpts from the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors guidelines. The excerpt on the left is the community engagement criterion, which required applicants to demonstrate 1, how they engage project area communities to identify their needs, 2, how they incorporated that feedback into the project, and 3, how they developed the project scope through collaboration with disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. The excerpt on the right is from the Equity Supplement, which was added as Appendix E in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program guidelines. During the project evaluation process, members of the Commission's now Equity Advisory Committee evaluated each transportation project with respect to that project's response to the community engagement criterion. The members directly contributed to a portion of our project evaluations that would ultimately determine the overall competitiveness of each project and development of the final staff recommendations, the links to which we shared in Q&A earlier. I'm going to advance to the next slide, Ken, please. Thank you. Advancing equity in transportation is an evolving process. To ensure we keep pace with community needs and consider equity throughout the project development, nomination, and selection process, Commission staff will continue to collaborate with the Commission's Equity Advisory Committee and our stakeholders to update the community engagement criterion and the equity supplement in the 4th cycle for all SB1 competitive programs. To this end, we plan to host at least one standalone workshop specifically to discuss the evolution and advancement of equity and community engagement criteria for all SB1 competitive programs in the coming months. We plan to hone existing evaluation criteria consistently across the 3 programs to better promote transportation projects that result in more equitable outcomes. This concludes my side of the presentation, so I will pause here for any questions or comments. Alicia or Celeste?
Hey, Naveen, I don't see any raised hands or questions in the Q&A.
Oh, I see Vice Chair Ms. Kelly has raised her hand.
Okay, you are unmuted, Martha.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand more about the matrix that you use for this community engagement. I mean, it's suffice to say that, you know, you've beefed up, you've added another component to it, but what does it actually look like? I mean, when you say CE, what do you ask those grant applicants to really show? Do you give them examples of what you're looking for, the criteria for community engagement? And is there a number or amount that we're giving these funding applicants to be able to report back on? Because sometimes, I mean, it's not enough to say that you put an announcement up, right? Or it's not enough to say that, you know, you had these scheduled meetings for engagement. I would really, really think that it would be important to see how many people were actually present, and they were not just governance, but actual community members. What type of engagement did they have? Was it something where they had one-on-one workshops? What does that look like? And if we don't have that, I would hope that we would include that in the months to come, and giving more defined roles in this community engagement, so that we can truly say that we did have community engagement, and not just during times that are not like available or access to those meetings, or did we actually reach out to certain particular groups, and were they representative of all groups that need to be engaged with?
Certainly, that's a very good point, Vice Chair Ms. Kelly. So I will address that in a couple of parts. I do want to go back to something I said on the first slide. I'll repeat myself again, just in case anybody else missed it. I do want to say that in the community engagement criterion that we updated in the 2022 programs, we required applicants to demonstrate 3 things. One was how they engage project area communities to identify their needs. 2 was how they incorporated that feedback into the project. And 3, how they developed the project scope through collaboration with disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. I repeated that portion here because I thought it was really, at least for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, I found it really inspiring to see how all of our applicants responded to those sections. Applicants who weren't able to engage the community quite as much, or weren't really sure where to start, did leverage the equity supplement and did advise that they will use that for further project communications and try to engage the communities after this particular application round. Applicants who were already doing incredible community engagement work and equity work within their communities through their regional transportation commissions, or regional partner agencies, they provided supplements. So our evaluators actually got to not only read the narrative that they had provided in the application itself, they also provided a separate supplement for community engagement that we could look into further if we wanted to have those numbers highlighted that you're talking about. And that was really inspiring and informational for us to read, because again, this is something new that we've been working on long term, but this is the first time we'd introduced it as a proper evaluation criterion. So I can provide an example of what some of those supplements look like. For example, they told us the number of community workshops that they did, exactly how they reached out to people, the number of impressions and engagements on their online ads, what social media traffic looked like, who are the different CBOs. These are community-based organizations that they approached and interacted with. They also told us where their blind spots were, where they were hoping to create more engagement. So if they weren't able to engage like an Indigenous community, for example, and they have Indigenous members in their larger community, how they plan to work on that, what kind of workshops they plan to host, and what kinds of activities they wanted to engage in to help people kind of come together and talk about the project in the future. The second thing that I found inspirational, and I know Rebecca Light is also on this workshop, both of us found this really inspiring. Rebecca Light is the manager of the LTCAP program here at the Commission. We found it really interesting that there were people talking about having people walk and do walking scores within the communities for Solutions for Congested Corridors program, at least me coming in as a new manager. That was really inspiring to kind of read about, and how they were trying to get people actively involved in walking their communities and then getting them to come into these public workshops and talk about what changes they wanted as part of this larger project portfolio that they were going to pitch for funds in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. I'm going to pause there and see if Matthew wants to add anything further, or anybody from LPP or TCEP wants to chime in to respond to Vice Chair Armas-Kelly.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and I really appreciate you clarifying that. I've worked in so many different projects where when we've had like a revision to an ATP or a round for transportation, their plan, their particular plan in jurisdictions such as Stanislaus with the MCAG, those walks really, really make a difference. Charrettes, all these different types of interactions. When folks are out in their community, it awakens and it heightens, and it really hones in on the experience of being in those corridors, in those spaces, in those walkways, whether it's parks, schools, safe routes. When you're out there and you get to hear firsthand, that is really robust. And I'm really grateful that that's the approach that we're taking, because it makes a difference.
Anybody from LPP or TCEP want to add anything to what I said? Or Matthew, did you want to add anything for all SB1 programs before we move on to maybe the next question or raised hand?
All I was going to say is I think you nailed it, Naveen. I have nothing to add. I'm just excited that it seems like we have a lot of interest on digging into this when we do have a standalone workshop around this and evolving the language that we currently have, so that we can strengthen how we consider community engagement and meaningful community engagement moving forward.
Any other questions or raised hands at this time, Celeste or Alicia?
Yes, we do have another raised hand. William Walker, you are unmuted. Just make sure you unmute yourself, please.
Sure, and I really appreciate the responses in regard to questions around community engagement. It's obviously why Vice Chair Armas-Kelly and I are engaged here, wanting to make sure that folks are having meaningful opportunities to engage in this work. I just want to also add that there's a very big piece of community engagement that, one, I think it's important that those who are engaging are kind of developing the frameworks of how we measure project, whether a project is worthy of being funded, or just, developing the kind of parameters around the process. And I think that the walk score example is a great example of that, but making sure that we create spaces for members of the community to define what this engagement looks like for them and how it could impact their community. And also just looking at ways to develop apples to apples comparisons. I know that often community engagement is tailored to different communities, but finding ways to ensure that even if you're looking at a rural community in the Central Valley and a more urban community and, in the coastal areas of California, that you can make the comparison of impact. And I'm not sure what that looks like. And I think that having town halls like this and our EAC meetings and other, discussions in other spaces will help to determine what those metrics might be. But thank you for sharing the work around equity and community engagement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your comment there, Chair Walker. So I'm also going to add to that and say something that I think the regional partners that we have and the stakeholders that we have do take the opportunity to pick up strategies from each other. Nowhere is that more evident than when we read through the comprehensive multimodal corridor plans, which again is a mouthful. So we do have an acronym for that. We call them CMCPs, but when we do go back in and read them, they do talk about different strategies that they're leveraging. I don't recall anything specifically related to community engagement in their applications, because obviously they're trying to elevate their project and talk about the work that they've done and in their communities. But I will say that in the last workshops that we did, for which you may or may not have been present, I'm sorry, I do not recall, but it was, there were quite a few members in our workshops who did exchange ideas. And I think part of the reason why we hold these public workshops to develop the guidelines is so that we can leverage ideas from each other and accept that feedback and construct better guidelines and also construct better project applications in the future. And then it's a process in perpetuity. It keeps informing each other down the road. So I do really appreciate your comments. They're well taken and well noted. And I'm really excited to be working with you and the rest of the Equity Advisory Committee to kind of advance equity and the community engagement criterion for the 2024 programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Celeste or Alicia, any other questions or raised hands?
Naveen, no more raised hands. We do have a question, so I'll turn it over to Alicia.
Hi, so this comes from Hina. Projects that are recommended through CMCPs, how is community engagement conducted within the planning phase of CMCPs? And are they mandatory for Caltrans and CTCs to be eligible for the SCC, the Solutions for Congested Corridor funds?
Thanks, Alicia. So Hina Chanchlani, you win the award for SCCP and asking the CMCP question for the first time. So thank you very much for kicking it off. Yes, so community engagement is conducted within the planning phase of CMCPs. It is a little bit more broad, and I will have, let me actually walk that back really quick. So the commission has comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines, also known as CMCPs, from 2018. We have not yet updated those guidelines. They are sticking around from 2018. And as far as I'm aware, we do not currently have a plan to update them, at least for the 2024 cycle, as far as I'm aware, but that could change. So stay tuned. As far as that, those guidelines are what set the standard for when the regions are developing their comprehensive multimodal corridor plans. That those requirements are determined from those set of guidelines. I do see that somebody more versed than me is raising their hand. That's Bridget Driller. She is from our planning team. She's incredible. And she essentially is the person who reviews the CMCPs when they come in with all of the Solutions for Congested Corridors program applications. So if we could unmute her really quick, and I think Bridget can take over and respond to that question.
Hey, Naveen, thanks for the intro. And you did a great job. I just wanted to add one thing, which is that we are looking to update those 2018 comprehensive multimodal corridor planning guidelines. I'm hoping at a future workshop we can talk more about what that timeline looks like. Our goal is to refresh them before SB1 program adoption. The current guidelines do include both guidance and resources around community engagement, but we think those areas can be strengthened in the guidelines, and so are looking forward to continuing that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo what Bridget said, and thank you so much, Bridget, for coming off mute to chime in. I do want to take a stab at the second part of Hina's question as well, which is, are CMCPs, again, that's comprehensive multimodal corridor plans, mandatory for Caltrans and the commission to be eligible for Solutions for Congested Corridors program funds? Yes, as of the 2022 program cycle, new or updated CMCPs are required to be considered eligible to compete for funds in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. They've always been required because they're statutorily required, but we understood that right around the time the program started, we also hit the pandemic, and a lot of agencies are smaller agencies and did not have the resources and the wherewithal to put together such huge detailed program plans. So we had allowed for them to keep on doing what they were doing with existing plans. And then last year is when we officially requested and required new or updated comprehensive multimodal corridor plans to be eligible to compete for funds. Hopefully that answers your question, Hannah. I know it's a little bit of a lengthier response, but if you have a follow-up, please do type it in or come off mute and we would be happy to have a discussion about it. Oh, I see Hannah's response. Thank you for asking a question. That was a good question. Thank you so much.
So we do have another question from Sona. Will the robust community engagement conducted for a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan development be sufficient for the proposed project, or will the guidelines require project level specific community engagement?
That is yet another great question. So CMCP, the community engagement required for CMCP development is for the entire corridor. Corridors are very, very large segments. They're very, very large areas, and projects in those corridors are made up of different segments, different portions. So if you have a large corridor and you are only competing for funds in SCCP, the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, for just this particular project, then you need to provide the community engagement details for that specific project for it to be considered competitive in the program itself. Does that answer your question, Sona? Great. Thank you so much, Sona. That was a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Any more questions, Alicia?
We actually have a follow-up from Hannah. How can an MPO like SCAG be involved in guidelines development for the plans?
For that, I can either turn it over to Matthew or Bridget because they might be better qualified to answer that question.
Yeah, Bridget, I'm gonna turn it to Bridget. I saw her hand come up. I'd rather other people talk more than me, so take it away, Bridget.
Sure, I'm going to defer a little bit. I think we will provide information at a future SB1 workshop about the process for updating those guidelines, but I'll be working closely with Naveen to get the word out about any workshops or opportunities for comments.
And Bridget, if you can stay on, I just saw another question come in from Lewis, if Alicia would oblige by reading it to us in her lovely voice.
I love it when you lie to me on a virtual meeting. So from Lewis, can you clarify new multimodal corridor plans? Many agencies have these plans that were completed for the prior cycles, and how will the updated plans and guidelines impact older CMCPs?
Yeah, so I can take that. I think what we have currently in the CMCP guidelines is that we recommend that an agency evaluates their corridor plan every 4 to 5 years just to ensure that it is current. But we do not require a new plan for each cycle. So if you have an existing plan, I would just recommend checking it out and making sure that it's up to date and that it includes any projects that you would like to consider for future cycles of congested corridors. And Naveen, please chime in if I said anything wrong or if you want to add anything.
No, I think you covered it, Bridget. Thank you. And Bridget, if you don't mind, we have lots of interest for the CMCP, so stay on with me. We'll co-host it together.
So again, from Sonia, she wants to know, was it mentioned that we need to update the CMCP developed for fiscal year 22 cycle? I know that Bridget, you mentioned that the commission was looking to update something. I don't know if there was some confusion or if it was something that was specific for any of the programs. So if we could clarify.
So the way that I understood that question was similar to the last one about whether if an agency has an existing corridor plan, if they would need to update it, and that would be at the agency's discretion, but not a requirement. And apologies if I misread that question. The question asker can let me know.
Thank you, Bridget. This next comes from Angel Pyle. Do you know if the commission will accept an alternative document, i.e. a uniformed corridor study in lieu of the CMCP? It seems these exceptions may have been made in the past.
Angel, we might need to follow up so that I can get some more information. I'm only familiar with one uniform corridor study that I think is synonymous with a comprehensive corridor plan. So I guess what I would just say is that the requirement that we have is that it's consistent with the CMCP guidelines that the commission maintains. And so I think as long as the planning document complies with those guidelines, it should be sufficient.
Thanks, Bridget. And I'm gonna take this one over just a little bit because I actually can see some of the questions coming in, and we're getting a lot of interest and questions on the comprehensive multimodal corridor plan process. So I just want to restate to the entire audience that CMCP's comprehensive multimodal corridor plans are only required in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. They are not required in the local partnership program. They are not required in the trade corridor enhancement program. So this is a very specific piece of the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. Martha, I saw that you asked a question. Your question is, corridor plans should include updates with the new equity inclusions, correct? And that is not necessarily required. And the reason that I say that is this. A comprehensive multimodal corridor plan is a planning document, and from which the planning document would have identified specific projects that would be coming individually to be seeking funding in our Solutions for Congested Corridors program. Those projects as standalone projects, which would be coming after the planning phase, need to adhere to our updated equity guidance or new community engagement requirements. So we may not require that all CMCPs adhere to the updates that we're making in our program guidelines. However, all projects as individual projects must. And as you heard Bridget mention, we are planning to update our planning guidelines, the comprehensive multimodal corridor planning guidelines themselves. And within that update, I imagine we will also be making those guidelines more current to ramp up some of the community engagement requirements we have in CMCPs. So I hope that addresses that question, because it's a very good question. But I think that the projects absolutely must meet the equity requirements in our evaluation criteria in order to compete well. And then I see one other question that I think Bridget already answered, but how often do you recommend a corridor plan is updated? It's truly to ensure that those plans are current and applicable based on our CMCP guidelines. And I believe we have a checklist that we require all applicants to use as a reference to self-determine whether their plans are adherent to our CMCP guidelines. So yeah, we don't say you need to update it every year, every 2 years. If you don't feel that your plan meets the CMCP requirements, then we recommend you undergo an update. I want to continue entertaining any questions or comments we have on CMCPs or on community engagement. But just understand that we will be taking on SCCP as a standalone workshop course this spring. And Naveen will certainly be bringing Bridget to those workshops to invite additional comments or questions or considerations for CMCPs. But unless we have any other questions or comments.
And Bridget just found out that she will be coming to the SCCP workshops with me.
Well, I'm not Bridget's. Bridget doesn't report to me, so I guess I don't know. I can't necessarily offer that direction, but
It'll be great.
we hope that she will join us. With that, actually, this is going to be another opportunity for our partners to engage with us. Ken, I'm going to ask you to turn it to the next slide, and I will bring Kayla back to talk about office hours.
Thanks, Matthew. So I will go over some specifics about our office hours that we're going to offer again this cycle. So we offered these in cycle 3 and we got good feedback from stakeholders that they were helpful. Office hours are going to be held from March to May and will be closed virtual sessions for your agency. The purpose of the office hour sessions will be to discuss technical questions regarding proposed projects. These will not be used to discuss guideline development, and staff will not provide specific feedback on an application. Sessions will be scheduled on a first-come, first-served basis, and scheduling information will be sent out soon. Like the slide says, these will be 30-minute appointments. We'll provide the time slots and instructions on how you can sign up for those in the coming weeks. And they will be closed for your agency. And I think that is it for this. So I'm happy to take any questions on this topic.
Hey, Kayla, we don't have any raised hands, but we do have some questions in the Q&A. So I'll hand it over to Alicia.
This comes from Hannah. Are you able to share notes, Q&A, and this presentation from today? And so I will let Matthew or any one of the other presenters talk about where you can find the recorded information and if they will be sharing slides.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia, and thank you for the question. So we do plan on posting the PowerPoint on our website following this workshop. I'll be honest, we're still working through our new experience using Zoom. Again, I know we're about 3 years behind the future. But what we are doing is we are transcribing a lot of the overarching questions we're getting and some of our responses, and we would be happy to share that back out as like a Q&A or an, in case you missed it. But we do have to be careful because a lot of the information or some of the questions that we've gotten are really just one-off questions, and we want to continue engaging with you all in future workshops, which is why we also made the determination to post recordings of the workshops on our website. So with that said, we won't be posting a transcript of all the Q&As that we receive, but we can certainly paraphrase some of the overarching information. And if we provided a response that you'd like to refer back to, we will also make recordings available on our website. Any other questions or hands raised before we start to wind this down? We have a few more slides.
Hey, Matthew, no raised hands.
No new questions submitted.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Ken. So this is where you can find us next. We know it's December 14th, and we know it's about a month and a half until we have our next workshops. But given the holiday season, as well as the January commission meeting, which usually comes right up on us, we are going to hold our next round of workshops that last week of January, first week of February. So we will post these dates. So you don't need to necessarily write them down, but they will be included in the PowerPoint. We'll post these dates on our workshop site with registration links, hopefully within the next week, so that if you are interested in each of the individual program workshops, these will be the opportunities to start to engage with us specifically on the individual programs. And just keep in mind that we will also post agendas with planned topics in advance of these workshops, as we mentioned. We aim to do that usually 10 calendar days prior to any given workshop. So the last thing I think I want to say on this slide is that we will actually, Ken, maybe we can move to the next slide because it's a bit about next steps. So We will be conducting workshops for the first 3 or 4 months of the new year. So we plan to bring draft SB1 program guidelines to our commissioners in June, which means that we will reserve the opportunity to hold workshops through mid to late April. We're currently planning to have about 3 individual program workshops per program, and then as Naveen highlighted earlier, we're going to have an additional standalone workshop or 2 focused specifically on community engagement and equitable outcomes. And the reason we're going to hold those as standalone is because they those conversations will consistently apply to all 3 programs. A little bit more about Cycle 4 timing and next steps. So as I mentioned, we do plan to bring draft guidelines to commissioners in June. Before we get to that point, we will also be soliciting feedback directly from our Equity Advisory Committee members. And that will mean that we can hopefully bring final guidelines for adoption in August 2024. With that, we simultaneously do a call for projects in August 2024 for kind of open season for prospective applicants to start submitting project nominations for our consideration. And we're planning to hold a roughly similar time frame to Cycle 3, which means applications will be due by late November, most likely, with an eventual program adoption for our Cycle 4 competitive programs, hopefully by June 2025. So with that, I want to see if we have any lingering questions or comments or anything that we weren't able to address earlier on in the conversation. I'm not currently identifying any action items that I think we need to bring forward again, other than definitely talking a bit more about comprehensive multimodal corridor plans. We will continue to talk about community engagement and equitable outcomes. And we're going to have a focused workshop or 2 around that. Denise, I know you asked a question a little bit earlier about whether or not I could come up with any trends across our evaluation criteria that stand out as evaluation criteria where no projects are successful. I have a text thread going with everybody on my team, and I don't think we were able to come up with any evaluation criteria that consistently projects perform poorly in, which I like to think means that we have a fair and balanced set of evaluation criteria that allows each project in each mode, depending on when it can be delivered and how much funding it's requesting. Each project has a fair shot as long as it can compete well across our multitude of evaluation criteria. Any additional questions other than a comment I see that I will address from Lewis, which might pose us a scheduling issue. But any other questions or comments for from the workshop? And then Lewis, I will address your comment. Lewis, I'll just say, Lewis has notified us that there is a STIP hearing scheduled on February 1st. I can absolutely tell you we do not want our regional partners to be in a STIP hearing while they are simultaneously participating in a Solutions for Congested Corridors workshop. So Naveen and I will work to find a different date for that final workshop that we had scheduled on Thursday, February 1st, so that we don't ask you all to divide your time between 2 screens. Alicia or Celeste, I'm going to turn it over if we have any additional questions to bring up.
Sure. So we do have one more CMCP question from Sonia. She said, you mentioned the updated CMCP guidelines should be expected prior to program guidelines release. When can we expect the updated CMCP guidelines? We are currently developing a new plan and want to ensure that the plan follows the updated guidelines. So I think this is for Bridget.
I think Bridget had to jump off. Naveen,
Okay.
I'm gonna turn it over to you if you heard anything different than me, but Naveen, do you wanna field that one?
The CMCP question?
Yeah.
When can we expect the updated CMCP guidelines? That is a great question. As far as I'm aware, we're still kind of in planning stages, so we haven't really announced any dates or expected timelines yet. But as soon as we know, you'll know. We
And
tend to
Naveen-
post everything online publicly.
Naveen, just confirm, are we planning to have CMCP guidelines adopted before our cycle 4 SCCP guidelines?
That seems unlikely at this time based on the conversations I've been a part of.
That's what I think too. So thank you for answering that, because I didn't know if Bridget said something different. I think so. So to answer your
Destiny's
question,
on there. Destiny Preston is on there. She said she can answer the question.
okay, go ahead, Destiny.
Hi,
Thanks.
everyone. My name is Destiny, and I joined the CTC on November 1st, so I'm still getting up to speed with everything. I would agree that we are in the internal planning process, so nothing is final yet. However, we are hoping to update the CMCP guidelines and bring it to the commission in May. So that is our current intention.
Okay. Thank you, Destiny. So then yes, you will see CMCP guidelines adopted several months before SCCP guidelines are adopted. See, look at that. We're all getting information in real time. I really feel like I'm living in the 21st century. I can't tell you how many times I've said that in the last 24 hours working with Zoom. Anyways, unless we have any additional questions or comments, I appreciate you all staying with us and joining us this afternoon. And I also appreciate your patience while we keep it lively. Yeah, it's we like meeting with you all, and yes, I think I can say our team might be a tiny bit rusty. Maybe I should just speak for myself, but feel free to reach out to us with any questions you may have via email. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming workshops in a little over a month.